I wonder just think for a moment, you're going to talk to your neighbour in a little moment, what is the most generous thing you've ever done? Or what's the most, if you're a bit shy, because we are British, a lot of us, and we don't like talking about that. So if you'd rather, what's the most generous thing that someone has done for you? So either what's the most generous thing you've ever done, or what's the most generous thing someone has ever done for you? Have a little think, and maybe just very quickly turn to your neighbour or to someone behind you and just share that thing very quickly. The most generous thing you've done, or the most generous thing that someone has done for you. Now, it's not the most in terms of amount, but one of my, I'll just let you finish conversations. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, come back to the front. There we go, well done. One of the most generous things that someone did for me was that when we were going through the Dartford Tunnel, where you have to pay £1 toll to get through, and for some reason the car in front decided that they would pay for us to go through as well, which was a really generous thing. It meant we didn't have to pay our £1. It was really generous. The problem was it caused complete chaos because they just paid for the 3 cars behind us as well. And we're just not used to people being generous for no reason. So actually they were being very generous, but it created tailback all the way around the M25. But I wonder how you in the past have been generous. Maybe you've given up your seat to someone on the train. Maybe you've given your time to volunteer. Maybe you've donated some money. Maybe you've even shared your lunch with someone when they forgot theirs. Well, our story today is all about a young boy who does just that. A young boy who looks up to Jesus, who is showing and telling people about his love and wants to feed the people. He looks into his bag and he sees he's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Not a bit like that, that's 6. I haven't unwrapped them because I didn't want to waste them. But 5 loaves, and I got those ready earlier. 2 fish. This boy looks into his bag and he sees his packed lunch that he can share or could share. And then he looks out to the crowds and he gives what he has generously so that others will be fed. He looks up to Jesus, he looks into his bag, and he looks out to the crowd. Can you say look up? Can you say look in? Can you say look out? Can you say bananas? So, let's just take a minute to look up to Jesus. And you might, if you've got Bibles on you or on your phones, just look at John chapter 6. We're going to be following that passage, John 6, 1 to 14. But let's just take a minute to look up to Jesus. And what strikes me about this miracle, and incidentally, it's the only miracle that Jesus uses what someone else brings to perform the miracle. But what strikes me about this miracle is firstly, how people can't get enough of Jesus. I mean, we read, they're following him everywhere. They can't get enough of what he's saying and showing them. The crowds are following Jesus around all day to listen to his teaching. Now, I don't know if you've ever been sat having a meal with someone and they've said, "Ooh, I didn't realize how hungry I was until I started eating." Anyone ever heard anyone say that? A few people. Or maybe you've gone as you open a big packet of Haribo, "I'll only have a few." But before you know it, you've eaten the whole packet and raided the cupboard for whatever else is in there that's sweet, because they were so good. Well, it's like the crowd here. They hadn't realized how hungry they were for Jesus and the love of God that he was talking about. But as they've tasted just a little bit, as they've heard just a little bit of Jesus, as they've seen a little bit of Jesus, they've realized how hungry spiritually they are. They've tasted a little and they can't get enough. They want more. And so this crowd, including the boy with the packed lunch, of following Jesus around and listening to him. Now, we don't know this, but I do wonder if the boy with the lunch, because he has got a lunch ready with him, actually was probably meant to be off somewhere else doing something different. But once he'd heard and seen Jesus, he can't help but dump that and make following Jesus the priority. Anyway, the crowd have been following and listening to Jesus all day, and so now it's getting late. And this is where the second thing about this passage strikes me. Yes, it's getting late. Yes, people haven't got food. And yes, the disciples suggest Jesus stops what he's doing and sends the people back to the local Tesco or to grab a pizza on the way home. But I don't know if you've thought about this, but even if the crowd do stay, I think they'd probably, most of them, be all right without eating for a few hours. I know they're hungry, but it's only been a day. I'm not sure they need to be fed. I'm not sure it's like a life or death thing. But Jesus, out of his love and out of his compassion, wants to bless them. He wants to meet their needs, and he wants them to know what kind of Father he has. And so he feeds them. Not just a little, not just enough, but to overflowing. In fact, we read there are 12 baskets left over. And so maybe this little boy is stood near Jesus and his disciples when Jesus asked Philip this question. We read he asked Philip this question: where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? Now at this point, Philip, we read, he gets all practical. He starts doing a spreadsheet in his head. I know some of you have been looking at that in school this week. He starts doing a spreadsheet in his head. He starts working out mathematically what would be needed to feed all these people. But the little boy, on the other hand, he just simply says, hey, this is what I've got. The little boy has looked up and seen Jesus. And in response to Jesus, he looks into his lunchbox. He sees 5 barley loaves and his 2 fish. And he thinks, well, perhaps I could share some of this. And so as he looks up to Jesus, as he looks into his own bag, he looks around at the crowd. And he sees there are a lot. I mean, a lot of people who need feeding. Commentators think 5,000 only refers to the number of men, not the women, not the children. So the boy sees thousands of people, a lot of people who need feeding. And I wonder at that moment whether the little boy thinks, nah. Perhaps he thinks, this isn't going to make any difference to anyone. What's the point? Perhaps he thinks, well, actually, I really do like those crisps. I really do like that chocolate bar. I really do like those sandwiches myself. So I'll hang on to those bit, and I'll just give the slightly bruised apple away. I'll have the best till I'm full, and then I'll give what's left. But as he looks up to Jesus, as he looks in at his lunchbox, and as he looks out to the crowds, we read the little boy chooses to place all that he has into the hands of Jesus. And what I think is really interesting about this boy's packed lunch is that the Bible doesn't just tell us there were loaves, it makes the point there were barley loaves. And John, who writes this version in the gospel, he doesn't just say fish, but he says 2 small fish. And I think that's really important. You see, the usual kind of bread that people would have eaten was made of wheat. And only the poorest people would have bread made out of barley. And you see, they lived in this space. Like Galilee, it's an amazing lake. Like the fishing is really good there. Getting fish, big fish, tasty fish, wouldn't have been any problem at all. But if you've not got much money, perhaps only 2 small fish is all that can be put in your packed lunchbox. This boy looks up and sees Jesus. Then he looks into his bag. He looks into the little he has. He looks out to the crowd. He sees how many people need feeding, and he gives generously. He gives the best. He gives his all. He doesn't give from his lack. He doesn't give from what he hasn't got. He gives everything he has got. Why would he do that? Why would he give out of his lack? He gives generously and abundantly from the heart what he has, and he places them into Jesus' hands. He didn't have to give anything. He wasn't even asked to, but he chose to. And in so doing, it shows his love and the tenderness of his heart. And wow, what a joy for that little boy to be a catalyst for that miracle and see Jesus take what he had and do something amazing with it. Can you imagine him going to school the next day or playing with his friends the next day and being able to tell them about this story? He must have gone home absolutely buzzing with a feeling like no other. Because there's a joy that is released in our lives as we give generously. Philip's mind had immediately run to the cost of the project. Philip had quickly calculated how many man-hours of work it would take, how many donkeys would be needed to carry the bread up the hill, how much money they'd need to find. He'd worked out the risk assessments. He'd got permissions from the local council sorted in his head that they'd need for an open-air event, and he'd decided it was impossible. But the little boy looked up, looked in, and looked out, and gave all he had into the hands of Jesus. Philip approached it as if everything depended on his own work. But the little boy approached it like everything depended on Jesus. George, could you just come up here for 1 minute? Could you just hold that box for me and hold it over the bowl? Hold it high. I'm just going to fill that box with water. You see, Philip was a bit like this box. He believed he could receive and get full, but only so much. But the little boy understood that followers of Jesus aren't to be boxes. Joel, could you just come up here as well? Come and stand next to George. Around there. He understood that followers of Jesus are to be like funnels. A box receives once, but once it's full, there's no room for any more. And eventually, that water that George is holding would sit there, it gets stagnant and stale. But a funnel, like the boy understood, receives and it gives away. It receives and it gives away. There's always room for more, because what it receives, it always gives. Thank you. Just pop those in the bowl and go and sit down. The boy that day didn't keep what he had. He gave it away. And as he saw what he had as being not just for him, but as being for everyone around him, a family for everyone, he received much, much more than he was able to hold onto. He saw the multiplication of the bread and the fish, not just in terms of providing a whole load more food, but in terms of people being fed spiritually, their lives being changed, and the kingdom of God's breaking out. And so here at St. Swithin's and St. Faith's, we're a family for everyone. And we want to be a family who are marked by radical generosity. We want to be a people who are a funnel rather than a box. It's what Vicky and I personally over the years have tried to practice and to grow in. We seek in our own lives to give first, to save second if we can, and then we live off the rest. And each year, we just seek to stretch it just a little bit more. It's what we practice and we're trying to grow in as a church. We seek to give first. 10% of everything people give, we use to support mission locally and globally. We try and save just a little bit so that when a team goes to plant, like up in Grimsby a couple of years ago, or down at St. Faith's, or somewhere else where Ben and Juliet will go in a couple of years' time, we've saved enough to give them to go and sow something else. Or we maybe just save a little bit to start up a fund to begin to help us get in upstairs. And then each year we just seek to stretch and stretch a bit more than the previous year. And then we live off the rest. So I just want to say thank you to those of you who faithfully and generously give. To those of you who give regularly, whether it's the children who give some of your pocket money or bring tins for Love Your Neighbor each Sunday, or whether it's the adults who tithe or give by standing order or who tap regularly each week. Because through what Jesus has placed into your hands, you have then placed into his, and you've had the joy, hopefully you feel the joy, of being a catalyst to seeing people's needs met. Lives changed through encounter with Jesus. Churches planted in the West End and in Grimsby. And you've blessed communities around the world who you'll never meet, but have been transformed because of your lives and your fishes. And to those who've been here a while and who haven't given or don't give regularly, please hear me. We are so, so thankful for you. And you, of course, are a key part of our family just as much. But maybe this is a good time just to consider how you too might play your part as you look up to Jesus, look into your bag, and look out to others. We've got a vision here to see lives and communities transformed. It's not our vision, it's what Jesus tells us to do in the scriptures. But what we've seen over the last 9 years as we've allowed God to move us, to love beyond ourselves, and to share generously out of what we have, regardless of how much it may feel like we've only got barley loaves to offer. And as we've trusted God's faithfulness, we've seen him bless others through us time and time again. And so for our vision series this year, we're focusing on the ballroom upstairs. I know we've been talking about it for years and people have been giving generously, but we just feel now's the time just to get it cracked, to get up there, to stop just kind of moving from one year to the next. We feel God saying, now's the time, get it done. Costs are only going to go up. One of the main bottlenecks amongst us, practically speaking, is that unfinished room upstairs. On a Wednesday night, youth are bursting at the seams in the back room. The 10:15, when it's not half term, is usually about 80% full. We know, people tell us that once you hit 80% full, you don't grow anymore because people don't feel it'll matter if they don't come and new people feel there's nowhere for them to sit. And then Love Your Neighbor is growing, the possibilities is growing, but we spend so much time, you spend so much time moving furniture and setting things up, and we'd much rather that time was spent in talking to people, in sharing the love of Jesus, in pointing them to people and places and organizations that can help them. It would also help generate a little bit of an income stream, which would help fund the ongoing work of our mission. So we have, through grants, and through some of you already giving generously a little bit each month over the last 2 years to that purpose, we've raised $78,000 so far. So we're nearly there. And it's been so humbling to see in a cost of living crisis a number of people sacrificially giving whether setting up, increasing, or in some cases actually needing to decrease, but in so doing still giving sacrificially and still stretching and trusting Jesus. And just on the grants, by the way, they aren't just random pots of free cash. These are grants that have come made possible by other Christians who we'll never meet, who have given generously over the years beyond themselves to something that won't even benefit them directly, but who've found the joy of the Lord in giving away so others are blessed. So to get in there and opened up and worshiping and even dancing, it was a ballroom after all, to increase our capacity in terms of space, but also for our teams, like I said, to focus on people rather than moving furniture. We need a final minimum of 25,000 to commission the contractors to go. They're all primed and ready to go. 25K is the bare bones. I mean, forget skirting boards. Forget something that I'd never heard of that kind of goes up there somewhere. But to get up there, basic, to allow us to use the space, begin to worship and begin to open it up, it's about 25K. The gift aid on top of that will get us over the line. If we stretch a little bit more, we can do things like have chairs. We can do things like have an AV system. But at the moment, I'm just so keen that we just get up there. If we need to picnic, well, we know how picnics can go when Jesus is at the heart of them. The PCC are trimming every penny they can find to make it happen this year because costs are going up and up. But we need one final push to make it happen. And so over this next little campaign, we're asking all of us to prayerfully ask God, firstly, to give us his compassion for others, to move us to be generous, and to prayerfully trust in his faithfulness. And if this is going to happen, it'll just take all of us bringing our barley loaves, not discounting because they're barley, but each bringing our barley loaves and trusting the rest to Jesus. You know, we've done far bigger than this. We're sitting in proof of it. And God has always come through. So on your seats, there's a couple of things. There's a pen, first of all. Hopefully you know what that is and found that. There's some little envelopes with loaves on the front. And then there's a little card that says, add your fuel to the fire. And what we'd love you to consider doing in a moment, we're just going to have time to pray, to ask God, is just to consider how you might be able to play your part. What loaves and fishes look like for you. In particular, we're looking kind of this morning for one-off gifts to get us over the kind of bump. But actually, it might be if you're not regularly giving that actually this is the morning that you want to set that up. And so on the cards, there's space for you to do that, to indicate one-off giving, a one-off gift, or to say you're going to set up regular giving, or actually just to say, I'm in, but I'm just going to go away and think about it, and I'd like someone to follow up with me.